Section 5, Board of Directors and Committees. The board serves as the link between shareholders and managers and acts as the shareholders' monitoring tool within the company. We have three subsections here. 5.1 deals with the composition of the board of directors. 5.2 talks about the functions and responsibilities of the board, and 5.3 deals with the various committees. Composition of the board of directors. The first point here is that there is no optimal globally accepted standard structure. By and large, the ideal board is one that adequately represents the shareholders, and in a good board there should be a mix of expertise, backgrounds and competencies. So there should be people on the board who understand the technical aspects of the company. There should be people who understand finance and accounting. There should be people who can help drive the company strategy. So in essence, when we have people with different backgrounds and competencies, they can ensure that an optimal strategy is set and that managers are indeed following that strategy. The next point here has to do with different kinds of directors. We can have an executive director, a non-executive director and independent directors. An executive director is somebody who is part of the company. These directors are also called internal directors. So if we have a board, and on this board we have the CEO of the company as well as the CFO of the company, both of them are executive directors, and since they are part of the company, they are also called internal directors. A non-executive or external director is somebody who does not work for the company. Independent directors are a category of non-executive directors. These are people who do not have a material relationship with the company with regard to employment, ownership or remuneration. Next point, we can either have a one-tier or a two-tier board structure. In a one-tier structure, we will have both executive as well as non-executive directors. So there isn't a separation between the two. There is a single board and we will have both. A best practice is that in such a board, the majority should be independent directors. In a two-tier structure, there is a separation between a supervisory board and a management board. In most countries, there will be regulations which prohibit members of the management board from serving on the supervisory board. There might also be regulations which limit the number of individuals who serve on both boards. The next point has to do with CEO duality. This is where the CEO and the chairman of the board are the same person. Historically, this has been the case in the United States, where you have a given person who's both the CEO and the chairman of the board. But in many countries, there is a move towards separating these two roles. So the CEO and the chairman of the board ideally should be two separate people. In these situations, the chairman of the board should be an independent director. The case of CEO duality does not arise when we have a two-tier structure, because we would have the CEO who is in charge of this management board, and an independent director would be the head of the supervisory board. The final point here has to do with staggered boards. The general practice for boards is that elections occur simultaneously and for specific terms. So we might have a situation where there is an election every 3 years, and if a board has, let's say, 9 positions, then the election for all 9 positions happens every 3 years. Another possibility is to have staggered boards, where we might say that the board is divided into 3 classes, and going back to my example of 9 seats, we might say that in year 1 these 3 seats are up for election, in year 2 we will have another set of 3 up for elections, and then in the third year you would have these final set of 3 up for election. So in a staggered board, shareholders cannot change the entire slate of directors at one time. This staggered board model was historically prevalent in the United States, but is now being replaced by regular board election terms. The benefit of a regular board election term is that the entire slate of directors can be changed in one election. The specific responsibilities of the board will vary across jurisdictions, but we generally have two broad elements that are common, and those are shown over here: duty of care and duty of loyalty. Duty of care requires board members to act on a fully informed basis in good faith with due diligence and care. Duty of loyalty is the duty of the board member to act in the interest of the company and shareholders. The duty of loyalty should prevent individual board members from acting in their own interest or the interest of another individual or group at the expense of the company and all shareholders. So, as we've said several times, it's the shareholders that elect the board of directors, and therefore the board of directors should be acting in the best interest of the shareholders. What we do here is list a few specific functions of the board. One major function is to guide and approve the company's strategic direction. Now, once the strategic direction is defined, the board needs to determine whether that direction is being followed. The board also evaluates the performance of senior executives, and ultimately the board is responsible for hiring the senior executives. The board ensures the effectiveness of audit systems and control systems. The board ensures that an appropriate enterprise risk management system is in place, and the board also reviews proposals for corporate transactions and changes. So this would include decisions on whether or not a given division should be spun off, decisions on whether or not to acquire another company, even decisions on whether the company should be acquired by somebody else. So typically these proposals are reviewed by the board first before being presented to shareholders. The board establishes committees that focus on specific functions, and here is a set of typical committees. Even though these committees are responsible for a particular function, ultimately the responsibility is with the board. So let's start with the audit committee. This committee is responsible for overseeing the audit and control systems and for ensuring that these systems are working effectively. Hence, the audit committee monitors the financial reporting process. This includes the application of accounting policies. The committee needs to ensure that the financial statements adequately reflect the economic reality of the company. The audit committee supervises the internal audit function. So this committee needs to ensure that this function is independent and that the work is being done in a competent manner. The audit committee also nominates the external auditor, and in addition to nominating the external auditor, it also proposes the compensation for the external auditor. Both internal and external auditors report their findings to the audit committee, which then proposes remedial action for any highlighted issues. The core responsibility of the governance committee is to ensure that the company adopts good corporate governance practices. The committee develops and oversees the implementation of the corporate governance code, the charters of the board and its committees, and the company's code of ethics and conflict of interest policy. The committee monitors the implementation of the governance policies and standards, as well as the compliance with applicable laws and regulations. If the committee identifies any violations of the law, then it recommends remedial actions. Coming next to the Remuneration or Compensation Committee, this committee develops and proposes compensation policies for the directors and key executives. These proposals are presented to the board for approval. In some cases, this committee will also be involved in setting the performance criteria for key executives. Occasionally, the compensation committee can be involved in developing compensation policies for the firm. The nomination committee. This committee identifies candidates who are qualified to serve as directors and recommends their nomination for election by shareholders. The committee also establishes the nomination procedures and policies. They identify the criteria for board directors. They also typically define the criteria for what constitutes an independent director. The nomination committee needs to help ensure that the board's composition is well balanced and aligned with the company's governance principles. The risk committee assists the board in determining the risk policy, the risk profile, and the risk appetite of the company. The committee helps establish the enterprise risk management system of the company and also oversees the implementation of this system. The investment committee reviews different investment opportunities available to the company and makes recommendations as to where the company should invest. The committee also reviews the investment related proposals made by the management team. The committees that we have discussed here are the most commonly used committees across the world, but the specific committees will vary from company to company and country to country. The one that is most common is the audit committee. In almost all countries, this committee is required by the law. For banks and other financial institutions, the risk committee is required by most regulators. Section 6, Factors Affecting Stakeholder Relationships and Corporate Governance. Broadly speaking, we have market factors and non-market factors. Market factors include shareholder engagement, shareholder activism, and competition and takeovers. Non-market factors include legal environment, the media, and the corporate governance industry. Let's talk about the market factors. One of the most basic market factors is shareholder engagement. Historically, a company engages with shareholders through the annual shareholder meeting, and we've talked about this before. The company also engages with shareholders through analyst calls. Historically, the focus in these meetings is on financial and strategic matters. However, there's a growing trend for greater engagement between companies and their shareholders beyond simply talking about financial and strategic matters. Several companies have realized that frequent and meaningful interaction with shareholders throughout the year helps build shareholder support and potentially counters the impact of activist investors who are focused on short-term returns. Activism refers to strategies used by shareholders to push a company in a certain direction. There can be several objectives and motivations here, but the primary motivation typically is to increase shareholder value. There are several shareholder activism tactics. Here are some of the major ones: proxy battles, shareholder resolutions, public awareness, and lawsuits. Shareholder activism can come from any set of or any category of shareholders, but the most common category is hedge funds. Hedge funds are loosely regulated in most countries, and can therefore pursue a greater range of activist opportunities. Competition and takeovers. Shareholders keep an eye on how their company is performing relative to the competition. And if a company is performing poorly, then there is a danger that senior managers will lose their job. So the basic idea is that the board of directors is overseeing senior management, and if the company is not doing well, the senior management is responsible. So the board of directors should take appropriate action against senior managers. Now, if no action is being taken, then the board of directors can be voted off. So they also have an incentive to do their job properly. If the board of directors and managers are not performing their jobs well, then there is a chance of a corporate takeover. There are several corporate takeover strategies, and those are shown over here. In a proxy battle, shareholders are persuaded to vote for a group seeking a controlling position on the company's board of directors. In a tender offer, shareholders sell their interests directly to the group which is trying to gain control, and in a hostile takeover, an entity attempts to acquire a company without the consent of the company management. At times, company senior managers and directors might include some anti-takeover measures in the corporate governance charter. These measures are good for the directors and the management in the sense that it helps them keep their positions, but these are potentially not so good for shareholders. Two typical anti-takeover measures are staggered board and shareholder rights plans. We've talked about staggered boards before. According to this plan, the board is divided into different categories, and the vote for each category happens at different times. So if we have three categories, the vote for category 1 might be in year 1, the vote for category 2 in year 2, and so on. So this makes it difficult for shareholders to change the entire board at one time. Shareholder rights plans, also called the poison pill, allows existing shareholders to buy shares at a discounted price if a new shareholder acquires a certain percentage of the company. Now, this might sound good, but such a provision detracts new shareholders from taking over the company, and in a sense helps existing directors and managers keep their jobs. Stakeholder relationships and corporate governance are impacted by the legal environment. Broadly speaking, countries either have the common law system or the civil law system. The US and UK have the common law system. Most of continental Europe, so that would be countries like France, Germany, Italy, and so on, have the civil law system. Under the common law system, the legislature enacts laws, but laws are also in a sense created by the judiciary based on their opinions. In a civil law system, the legislature enacts laws and the judiciary is primarily responsible for interpreting the law. Now, the point made here is that the common law system provides better protection for shareholders and creditors relative to the civil law system. The other point you need to know here is that creditors are generally more successful in enforcing their rights relative to shareholders. The reason is fairly straightforward. The rights of the creditors are generally easier to define, and they are documented in something called the indenture. And what creditors need to receive is fairly straightforward. They need to receive their principal payments and interest payments, and also it's clear that in terms of capital structure, the creditors get precedence over shareholders. So that is why creditors will be more successful in enforcing their rights. The media also impacts corporate governance and shareholder relationships. it is quite clear that the media has a tremendous amount of influence. So not only does the media get information out very fast, but the information also spreads to a very wide audience. Senior managers and the board would generally be very concerned about what the media is saying and would typically try and follow corporate governance practices which are viewed favorably by the media. In recent years, the impact of social media has also been tremendous. Historically, companies have had a significant impact on the media. The clout of companies has been much more than the impact of stakeholders such as customers and the public in general. But with social media, it has become a lot easier for smaller stakeholders such as customers to share their views with the public. The third point here has to do with the corporate governance industry. And the first question that students have is, what is this corporate governance industry? This refers to external corporate governance services such as corporate governance monitoring, rating and recommendations, and proxy voting. So we have a given company or a set of companies with their corporate governance, but an external entity will be monitoring whether the corporate governance at a given company is good or not. And these external entities might also issue ratings and recommendations. External entities might also help with the proxy voting process. Now, these services have become quite popular since a 2003 ruling where the United States SEC required mutual funds registered in the United States to disclose proxy voting records and to ensure that proxies are voted in the best interest of their clients. So think about a large mutual fund company now. Before this ruling, this large mutual fund company might not have been overly concerned about proxy voting. But since this ruling, obviously the large mutual fund companies need to show their clients that they are voting in the best interest of the clients, and these mutual fund companies might not have the capacity to properly evaluate which companies have corporate governance. So they would approach external players that can provide corporate governance services such as those shown over here. In the long run, these services benefit the shareholders of a company.